Tatyana stood by the window of her apartment, looking at the rain that was pouring down. The sun seemed to have decided to hide, leaving the world in shades of gray. That evening, her husband, Victor, had a farewell party with colleagues, and, although her heart was heavy with foreboding, she decided that she had to trust him. After all, they had been together for 10 years, and during this time they had experienced a lot, both joys and hardships. Nevertheless, anxiety did not leave her. She remembered how many times Victor had talked about his work. He often stayed late at office parties, and, despite her persuasion, more than once returned late, sometimes even with a slight smell of alcohol. Tatyana tried not to think about it, but her intuition told her that something was wrong. "Everything will be fine," she said, turning to her reflection in the window. "Just a farewell party. He will come back, and everything will be fine." When the clock struck 8, Tatyana decided it was time to get ready for bed, although she couldn't sleep. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on the sofa with a book, trying to distract herself. Time dragged on slowly, and soon she began checking her phone, expecting a message from Victor. But there was no text message, no call. Anxiety surfaced again. Finally, around midnight, she heard the sound of a key in the door. Tatyana jumped up, her heart pounding faster from excitement and anxiety. Victor entered, and she immediately noticed that he looked different. His eyes were too shiny, and his smile was forced. "Hello, darling," he said, trying to look casual. "Hello," she replied, feeling a ball of anxiety and bewilderment coiling in her chest. "How did it go?" "Everything's fine," he nodded, but Tatyana noticed how he looked away, which immediately alerted her. "Aren't you tired?" she asked, trying to hide her feelings. "A little, but everything is fine. I'm glad you waited for me," he answered, coming closer. Tatyana felt her heart beat even faster. At that moment, she decided that she could no longer hide her suspicions. "Victor," she began, trying to speak calmly, "will you tell me what really happened at the party?" He froze, and a shadow of fear flashed across his face. "It was simple, Tanya. We discussed projects, made toasts. You know how it happens," he said, but his voice sounded unconvincing. Tatyana knew that something was wrong, and her intuition told her that her fears could be reality. She decided that she had to find out the truth, and having gathered her courage a little, asked, "And where was Sveta?" Sveta was her best friend, with whom they had known each other since childhood. She had always supported Tatyana and was a part of their lives. Victor hesitated for a moment and then said, "She was at the party too. We just had a great time." Tatyana felt a cold wave wash over her. Her intuition was right. She couldn't believe that her best friend could betray her like that. Victor, you can't just brush this off. I feel like something is wrong. Tell me the truth. She turned to him, her voice shaking. At that moment, Victor seemed to lose confidence. He lowered his head, and Tatyana saw him nervously fiddling with his fingers. I didn't want you to find out like that. It was a mistake, he said, and his voice sounded sad. Tatyana felt her world crumbling. She could never have imagined that he would cheat on her with her best friend. How could you do this? She asked, her voice sharp and full of pain. How could you betray me and our family? I didn't mean to, Tanya. It was an accident, he said, his eyes filling with tears. I'm so sorry. Tatyana couldn't hold back her tears. Her heart was breaking, and with each passing moment, the anger and betrayal grew inside her. You said you loved me, she said, her voice quiet and bitter. And now you're saying it was a mistake? How can I believe you? Victor was silent, unsure of what to say. Tatyana felt she had to find out. I want to know what happened. How did it happen? She asked, her voice determined. We were drunk. I don't know how it happened, he said, his voice shaking. I didn't want to lie to you, but it happened. Tatyana recoiled as if his words were a physical blow. She remembered all those times when Victor had told her about love, about the future, about how they dreamed of children and a life together. Now it all seemed like a lie. I can't live like this anymore, she said, her voice firm. I don't know if I can forgive you. Tanya, please don't say that. I love you, he began. But Tatyana interrupted him. Do you? She exclaimed. How can you love me if you cheated on me with my friend? This is betrayal, Victor. She felt tears running down her cheeks, and at that moment her phone rang. It was Sveta. Tatyana hesitated, but finally answered. Hi, Tanya. How are you? Her voice rang out, which seemed so carefree and joyful. You don't know? Tatyana asked, unable to contain her anger. I just found out about you and Victor. At that moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Tatyana knew that Sveta realized that her betrayal had been revealed. Tanya, Sveta began, but Tatyana interrupted her. Don't say anything. I don't want to hear it. You betrayed me, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for it, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Tatyana hung up and looked at Victor. He was standing with his head down, and she realized that this wasn't just a conversation. This was a farewell to the life she knew. I can't go on like this. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, her voice full of weariness. You and Sveta destroyed everything we built. Victor seemed to realize that he was losing her. He came closer, trying to take her hand, but she pulled it away. Don't touch me, Victor, Tatyana said, her voice cold. You have no right. She turned and walked out of the room, her heart full of pain and betrayal. She knew that she had a long road to recovery ahead of her, and that it would be full of difficulties. A few days passed, and Tatyana tried to sort out her feelings. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every minute, every second seemed like an eternity. She didn't know how to live on, and especially didn't know how to look her best friend in the eyes, who turned out to be a traitor. Sveta tried to contact her, sending messages and calls, but Tatyana didn't answer. She felt betrayed and alone, and it was hard for her to realize that her life had changed forever. One evening, when it was raining again outside, Tatyana decided to go for a walk to get some fresh air. She walked along familiar streets, listening to the sound of drops falling on the asphalt, and tried to sort out her thoughts. She understood that forgiveness is a difficult process. She needed time to accept what happened and sort out her feelings. She couldn't just forget the offense, but at the same time she didn't want anger to fill her life. A few days later, Tatyana decided to meet with a psychologist to talk about her experiences. She understood that she needed support to cope with what happened. At the first meeting, she talked about her feelings and how hard it was for her to cope with betrayal. The psychologist listened to her, asking questions, and helped Tatyana realize that her feelings were normal. Forgiveness is a process, she said, and it doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the pain and allowing yourself to move on. Tatyana thought about her words. She needed time to figure out how she wanted to move on. She knew she couldn't just forget about what happened, but maybe with time, she could find the strength to forgive. A few weeks passed, and Tatyana decided that she wanted to meet with Victor. She knew they needed to talk and figure out how they would build their lives from here on out. When they met, Victor looked depressed, but at the same time hopeful. He was waiting for her and ready to listen. Tanya, I understand what I've done, and I'm very sorry. I didn't expect it to lead to such consequences, he began, his voice shaking. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, Tatyana said, her heart constricting with pain, but I want to understand what happened. They talked about what had happened, and Tatyana realized that Victor truly regretted his actions. But that didn't change the fact that he had betrayed her trust. I don't know what's going to happen next, she said, her voice quiet. I need time to sort out my feelings. Victor nodded, and they continued to discuss their feelings and experiences. Tatyana felt that this conversation was an important step toward healing. A few more weeks passed, and Tatyana tried to focus on herself. She started exercising, took drawing classes, and spent more time with friends. Although the pain of betrayal was still with her, she tried not to let it control her life. Sveta continued to try to contact her, but Tatyana felt that she was not ready for it yet. She understood that time heals, and maybe one day they would be able to talk and sort out their relationship. Eventually, Tatyana realized that forgiveness was not only about Victor and Sveta, it was also about herself. She wanted to let go of anger and resentment in order to start a new chapter in her life. One day, sitting on the riverbank, she decided that she was ready to take a step towards forgiveness. It was not easy, but she understood that it was necessary for her inner peace. She wrote Sveta a message in which she offered to meet and talk. It was a difficult decision, but Tatyana felt that it was the right step. When they met, the atmosphere was tense, but Tatyana knew she had to be open. "I can't say that I've forgotten everything," she began, looking at Sveta. "But I want to understand why this happened." Sveta looked depressed, her voice trembling as she began to explain her point of view. They talked about their feelings, and although it was not easy, Tatyana felt that this was the beginning of a new stage. Despite all the trials and tribulations, Tatyana understood that she was stronger now. She found the strength to forgive, and this was an important step on the path to healing. Now she had the opportunity to rebuild her life, and she was ready for the new challenges that lay ahead.